Welcome in CSBs. My name is Jacob Harnois, and this is Malachi Grant. We're excited to host you today on our amazing podcast, and hope you have an enjoyable time. Malachi, take it away.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about incentives. Incentives are the things that motivate people to do something. So there's three main types of incentives that exist. It's social, economic, and moral, and everybody can be affected differently by these types of incentives. So Jake, what do you think what incentives do you think affect you the most?
So, to be honest, they all actually affect me in different ways depending on the situation. I don't think there's one that actually affects me more than the others. So, for example, let's say I want to get to a party fast because I'm late and I could either speed or go the speed limit. If I go the speed limit, I'll be late and miss out on social interaction, which is my social incentive. Or if I speed, I have the chance of getting a ticket, which is an economic incentive. So for me, on that situation, I would not speed because I do not want a ticket. So the economic incentive is greater than the social one. And then, like, I guess for a moral incentive, for example, lying or cheating, I would rather not lie and not cheat rather than gain a higher social status or be more popular. So I guess the moral incentive is stronger for me in that one. And then for social, maybe I might dress differently just because I would want to, I guess, seem like a cooler person. So that's a social incentive for me. Maybe get more expensive clothes. So the social is higher than the economic incentive. Those are just a few examples. Everyone has different things. What about you, Malka?
I kind of understand what you're saying there, and I could agree. But if I had to choose like one certain incentive that I feel like affects me the most, would definitely be moral. Um, so I have like pretty high standards I'd like to live by, and I can easily feel guilty if I don't live up to those high standards. So yeah, overall, I think moral incentives would probably affect me the most. So recently in CSB, we've been reading Freakonomics, and it's a book about economics, and we've been really focusing on incentives in that book and gets people to like do things. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was picking up kids from parents picking up their kids from daycare. So Jake, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so basically there was a daycare, and like all daycares, the parents, they would leave their kids there and then go do whatever they needed to do, so they could have more time without their kids. And there was a certain amount of parents that were being late to pick up their kids. So the daycare people, they're kind of getting frustrated and stuff, and so they decided to enact an economic incentive of $3 every time the parents were 10 minutes late onto their monthly payment. And so the amount, let's say the amount of parents before being late was X amount. And after the $3 economic incentive was enacted, the X amount actually went up. So maybe like 3X or 4X or whatever. So Malachi, can you kind of explain a little bit why this happened?
Yeah, I think it's pretty surprising actually, because what most people would think is $3. So like I don't want to have to go pick up my kids and pay an extra $3. So but why the reason that it actually went up is, so at first it was a moral incentive, and so the people felt bad that they weren't picking up their kids on time. It kind of made them look like bad parents, and they felt bad because the daycare people would have to watch them without actually getting any pay. So they felt like it probably was unfair, and they probably felt a little bad and guilty about it. So then less parents were doing it. But once the tax was added on, uh, basically more parents actually went up because they're like, okay, well, I'm going to pay $3. That's not that much at all.
I think you explained it pretty well there, Malachi. So let's talk about the next topic from Freakonomics. So let's talk about the teachers that were cheating. Who would have thought that teachers ever cheated? Our teachers never cheat. I believe in you guys. So let's see. So the teachers in the Chicago school system on standardized tests, they were cheating, and the way they were cheating is they would change their students' answers, um, so they would have higher scores, so the teachers would not seem like bad teachers, and either wouldn't get fired or get a better pay raise. And so, Malcolm, can you talk a little bit on the incentives involved in this situation?
Um, yeah, sure. So basically, what happened is there'd be teachers, and there would be their students, and they take things like standardized tests. That was like one of the biggest things that teachers would cheat in. So they kind of have a social and all kind of three a little bit of the incentives. So basically, they had an economics incentive. If their classrooms were really bad, the kids were struggling, standardized testing was terrible. Basically, they weren't good teachers. They could lose their jobs. And then they had a social incentive to make sure that their kids were doing good, and that would make them look like good teachers. And they have a moral incentive. Most of the time, though, the economic and social standards, incentives here of the teachers would overpower the moral ones because technically they're not really doing the right thing. But as long as they're getting paid and they look good, they're definitely okay with it. So, what are your thoughts about that, Jake?
So, I just think it's interesting that the teachers actually were able to bring themselves to cheat on standardized tests. Because I guess for students, you think of standardized tests as these big, scary tests, and there's no way you would ever want to cheat on them just because you're like just so worried about what would happen. But so let's actually kind of talk about how the teachers were caught in certain ways they cheated. So we already talked about the main way, which kind of encompasses every single way where they just would change the students' answers. So the way they did this is they created an algorithm to look at certain teachers' school tests and also certain groups of students. So some students, they're just good students, other students, not good students. Some classes are more just average good, more classes average bad. And they kind of just go and see their test scores throughout their years of schooling. And some of the teachers would get a bad class of students, and then the year they had that teacher they would have really 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 good test scores, and then the next year they would have bad test scores again. And so that kind of so they would weed those ones out, and then after they found those ones that kind of there was the um, inflection in the test scores, then they would kind of do algorithms on the actual test answers themselves. And they found there were some that actually had certain answers in a row that were just all correct, or just weird patterns in the answers, like maybe more kids getting the hard ones correct than the easy ones, which doesn't make sense. And all of these could just be coincidences, but there's so many that it kind of proves the point that they're not. So let's talk about so teachers, they're highly affected by the social and economic incentive, not so much the moral. And that is the same thing with sumo wrestlers. So Malcolm, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so with sumo wrestlers, a lot of them they have these social and economic incentives. So social, they want to look like good wrestlers, and economic, they actually get paid for being better wrestlers, and basically they're higher up on the chain. And so where you can see this is with so how sumo wrestling matches or tournaments, I guess, would work is that they would go by 15 games. If you win over half, which would be 8 wins, then you get to move on or you move higher up the chain. So we can see here with a wrestler, let's say, who's 7-7. So they have one more game left. If they lose, then they're out. If they win, then they're still in. So this 7-7 wrestler would go against an 8-6 wrestler, and so basically a projected chance for the 7-7 wrestler to win against an 8-6 wrestler would be about 48.7%, which makes sense because the 8-6 wrestler would uh, be more likely to win because they should be slightly better wrestlers. But the actual percentage of those wrestling matches is 79.6. So as you can see there is probably a little bit of there definitely is a little bit of cheating involved because the chances are way too high compared to what they are to be projected as. And that's because the 7-7 wrestlers would probably ask, like, talk to the 8 to 6 wrestlers. They kind of have their little code, and basically it's that if the 8 to 6 wrestler lets the 7 to 7 wrestler win, then they would allow, like, the next time that they wrestled, they would let the 8 to 6 wrestler win when it really mattered. So basically, it's kind of a win-win situation. They both go higher up on the chain, and they can kind of cheat together as a little group. So another thing we read about in Freakonomics was this guy named Paul Feldman who sold bagels. So Jake, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so pretty sure we all like bagels. So this guy, Paul Feldman, he had a good job, just a regular, I guess, office job. He quit his job to sell bagels. And you might think of bagel shops where you go into their shop, you buy a bagel, you get whatever toppings you want or whatever, and then you leave. But his bagel business was a little bit different. So he basically would buy bagels in bulk and then bring them in like little boxes or whatever, and then had a money box and then a sign. And then he would go to different office buildings in big cities in Washington. And then basically, the sign was kind of saying, the bagels are this amount of money, so when you take a bagel, please put that amount of money in the money box. And yeah, there was no one there. He wasn't staying there and enforcing the rules. He would go to the next office building and put the bagels there. And so you might think there's no one there, so why would they pay the money? They could just have a free bagel. I mean, everyone loves bagels. So but actually it's kind of surprising, the amount of people that were truthful and actually paid the money was about 87%. The average was 87%. And something that's interesting is the smaller businesses actually had a higher amount of percentage of truthfulness, which makes sense, I guess, because you'd think if you know everyone in the business and you see everyone regularly, you'd know, oh, that guy's the liar and the stealer. So you kind of shame them. So that's kind of more of like a social incentive. Um, and then the bigger companies, the percentage of truthfulness was less, I guess, because of so many people that it's kind of just hard to pick out the different people that steal. And Samaka, you have anything else to say about this topic?
Yeah, one more thing I'd like to talk about is mood can really infect incentive. So this is seen during holidays, and also so basically during the holidays, people would be stressed. They'd have to be working a lot. They need to be making money for their families, buying presents and stuff. And so they're stressed. It turns out that the amount of truthfulness with people who are buying the bagels would go down because their mood is kind of on a decline. Another thing that can be seen with this is before September 11th, 2001, um, the amount of truthful bagel buyers was a certain amount. And then after 9/11, it actually went up 2% and has stayed there since. And that can be attributed to people, like, since the terror attacks, they wanted to be truthful, and they just felt overall more inclined to buy the things properly as they should be. So me and Jake are actually part of a church together, and so one thing that we have in that church is called tithing. How tithing works is you pay 10% of your income, which seems like a decent amount, but it's actually not that bad at all. And what it's used for is it helps maintain our church buildings, allow us to do activities, and we also have missionaries, so it helps fund missionaries and their missions and stuff for them. So Jake, do you kind of want to talk about the incentives that come with tithing?
Yeah, so there really is no one that enforces the rule of tithing. It's kept confidential with, I guess, kind of your ward leader, which is kind of like the group of people in a small area of about 100 people. And no one else knows about it except for you and him. So, yeah, so it's kept confidential. So there's not really any social incentive that has to do with this. There's just economic, which is either having your full income or 90% of it, or the moral incentive of either paying it and knowing that you did what you were supposed to do or not, and feeling guilty that you didn't do what you're supposed to do. So you probably think, since there's absolutely no one really enforcing it, and you could even lie about it if you'd like to, but and the other option is having more money and probably just having that extra money to spend on whatever you'd like, have more food, more clothing, just certain things like that. So you'd probably expect it to be kind of low, the amount of truthfulness. But from what we learned in the bagel business, where there's not anyone enforcing the rules, we can assume that it's around 87% as well. Maybe a little bit less in some areas, maybe a little bit more, but around 87%. So yeah, do you have any more thoughts on that, Malachi?
Um, no, not really.
All right.
You pretty much
Well, that is all we had for you guys today. We hope you have a great rest of your day. This is Jay Carnoys and Malachi signing off. Hope you enjoyed this CSBs. Work hard, work smart.